Love makes us do crazy things. But what happens when that love becomes the virus and someone dies? What happens when a man's perfect life, his future, is shattered by a secret he can't outrun? 7 days, that's all it took. A wedding, a love story, and then murder. What happens when one woman's desperate need for love collides with a man's need to protect his life, his reputation, and his marriage? Meet David Scott, an Australian in his early 30s, charismatic, brilliant, and respected by everyone who knows him. As an emergency room doctor, he saved lives every single day. His colleagues called him the man you'd want at your side in a crisis, and patients praised his calm, control-led manner in even the most chaotic situations. He had everything: a successful career, the admiration of his peers, and a bright future. David was the kind of man people looked up to, people like his new wife, Sophie. Then there's Sophie Williams, beautiful, sweet, and full of optimism. Sophie had everything she ever dreamed of. At 28, she had just married the man she thought she'd spend the rest of her life with. Her smile was infectious. Her joy was undeniable. Sophie, originally from the Philippines, moved to Australia to start a new chapter. And what better way to begin than with the man she thought was perfect? Sophie was the epitome of innocence. She trusted David completely. They had met 2 years ago, and it didn't take long for Sophie to fall head over heels for him. David, on the other hand, was just as captivated by Sophie's warmth, her kindness, her zest for life. They were the perfect couple, or so everyone thought. David and Sophie's love story seemed like something out of a movie. Their engagement was a dream come true, a proposal under the stars during a vacation in the Maldives. Sophie was overjoyed when David slipped the ring onto her finger, and she couldn't wait for their life together to begin. But as they entered their wedding week, everything seemed to be perfect. They were in the middle of planning a vintage Hollywood-themed wedding at a breathtaking venue in the heart of Sydney. Sophie was glowing. David was steady, the kind of couple everyone admired from the outside. But behind the smiles, behind the social media posts of happy moments, there was something Sophie couldn't see, a secret so deep that even David, the man she thought she knew so well, was hiding it from her. A secret that would unravel their picture perfect life in the most horrifying way. David thought his life was flawless, but even the most carefully built facades can crumble. And for David, the truth would eventually catch up with him, no matter how hard he tried to keep it buried. Sophie had no idea that in the midst of her wedding plans, David was secretly drowning in guilt, trapped by a decision he could no longer undo. The man she thought was her soulmate, the man she was about to marry, was living a double life, and that double life was about to come crashing down in the most catastrophic way imaginable. David had always told Sophie she was the one. From the moment they met, he made her feel like the center of his world. Every look, every gesture was a promise of forever. And when David proposed, it was nothing short of magical. A private dinner on a secluded beach in the Maldives, the sunset casting a warm glow over the two of them as he knelt down on one knee, holding up a ring that sparkled brighter than the stars above them. Sophie had never felt more certain of anything in her life. She was marrying the man of her dreams. David was her everything. She couldn't wait to say yes to a life of adventure, shared moments, and a future filled with love. And David, too, seemed like the man who could give her everything she ever wanted. They began planning the wedding off their dreams immediately. Sophie poured herself into every detail, picking out the perfect venue, designating visions that reflected their love story, and obsessing over every little thing. But it wasn't just about the big day for Sophie. It was about the life that awaited them after the vows were exchanged. David, on the other hand, was fully invested. He watched Sophie with admiration as she made every choice with such care. He kept telling her that she was perfect, that their future together would be everything they dreamed of. His reassurance made Sophie feel safe. He was her rock, her steady partner. Together, they were unstoppable. They were the ideal couple. In every conversation, David reminded Sophie that she was the one. He reassured her that their love would last forever. They laughed together, made future plans, and talked about children, about growing old together. They were creating a dream life, one filled with shared adventures and unshakable love. Sophie couldn't have been happier, couldn't have felt more secure in David's arms. David promised Sophie that no matter what came their way, he would always be there for her. She was his priority, his one and only. And Sophie, she believed every word. She believed in David with all her heart. She was ready for a life of pure happiness. Nothing could tear them apart. But what Sophie didn't know, what no one could have known, was that in the quiet corners of David's life, there were secrets that were starting to unravel. Secrets that David thought he could keep hidden. Secrets that he couldn't escape. He wanted Sophie to believe in the perfect future they were building. But as he looked at her, every perfect moment, every promise felt like a lie waiting to break apart. The man Sophie thought she knew, the man she trusted, the man she was about to marry, was already living a life of deception, and that life, one filled with lies and impossible choices, was about to catch up with them both. Now, let's meet Maria Sanchez, a 33-year-old Filipina who worked as a nurse in the same hospital where David saved lives every day. Unlike Sophie, Maria had never dreamed of fairy tales. Her dreams were grounded in ambition, in making something of herself and in proving her worth to a world that often overlooked her. But in David, she saw something else, something more personal. Maria was ambitious, driven by the need to prove herself in a field where she was often dismissed. But underneath that confidence, she longed for validation, for someone to notice her, for who she was beyond her work, a woman capable of more than just taking orders. It all started innocently, at first. Just a few moments of shared responsibility during a particularly busy shift. Maria had always admired David from afar, his calm demeanor, his ability to keep everyone at together in a crisis. But she soon realized that David, despite his polished exterior, wasn't as invincible as he seemed. David's vulnerability, his need for validation, was something Mariana noticed immediately. He didn't seem like the type to show weakness, but there was something about him that made her think wasn't as perfect as he wanted everyone to believe. Maria saw an opportunity. She had always been a great listener, the kind of person who knew how to make someone feel seen, especially when that someone was a man like David, who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Over time, their interactions grew more personal. It wasn't long before their professional exchanges became something else, something more intimate. Late-night messages, casual lunches turned into long conversations. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their connection deepened. What started as concern turned into something more dangerous. The more David confided in Maria, the more she made him believe that maybe, just maybe, she understood him better than anyone else. Sophie was busy with wedding plans. The pressure of marriage, of living up to the expectations, was starting to weigh on David and Maria. Was there ready to listen, to soothe? Maria made David feel like someone saw him for who he really was, not just the doctor saving lives, but the man carrying his fears and insecurities. But what Maria didn't know was that David was already planning a future with Sophie. Sophie was the one he was about to marry. Yet with Maria, there was something else, a connection he couldn't ignore. But Maria wasn't just interested in being David's confidant. She wanted more. She wanted to be the one David turned to, the one he needed. She began to make her feelings known in subtle but unmistakable ways. Compliments became bolder. Touches became more lingering. In David, he wasn't as immune as he wanted to be. Maria knew she had him, even if he didn't realize it yet. She wanted David to choose her. She believed in their connection. She was willing to wait. But the more David pulled away, the more insistent she became. She wasn't going to let him slip through her fingers. Maria had always been a shadow in David's life. Never fully seen, but always there, lurking in the background. While Sophie was busy with wedding preparations, family plans, and her dream of a perfect future, Maria was quietly waiting for her chance to step into the space Sophie left open. For months, Maria had been the one David could turn to when the weight of his life became too much. When Sophie's expectations grew too heavy, when his work life became all-consuming, Maria was there to listen, to offer advice, and to soothe the cracks that began to appear in David's world. It was during any of those late-night shifts in the glow of fluorescent lights and the hum of the hospital that David began to open up. He'd never been one to confide in others, especially not about his personal life, but Maria made him feel seen in ways Sophie couldn't. She didn't judge him for his stress. She didn't pressure him. She just listened. David admitted to Maria that the pressure of his relationship with Sophie was beginning to weigh on him. The wedding was approaching, but instead of excitement, he felt suffocated. He confessed that Sophie's expectations were growing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't living up to them. He wanted to be the perfect man for her, but sometimes he wondered if it was too much. Was he really the man Sophie thought he was? Sophie wanted him to be perfect. She was planning every detail of their future, while David felt like he was constantly falling short. Maria, on the other hand, accepted him as he was. There were no high expectations, no perfect answers, no picture-perfect future, just him. And that felt good. That felt real. It wasn't just his personal life that was wearing on David. It was his work, too. The stress of his residency had been overwhelming. And despite being one of the best in his field, David couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. Maria, with her calm and steady presence, was the only one who seemed to understand the toll it was taking on him. Maria knew how to read David's moods. She could tell when he was stressed, when he was exhausted, when the weight of his responsibilities had become too much to bear. And when those moments came, she made sure to be there to remind him David was doing the best he could. She'd say things like, "You can't save everyone, David. You're only human." What started as simple concern for his well-being soon became something else. David's mind began to rely on Maria more and more. When Sophie was busy with wedding details, when his colleagues were focused on their own lives, Maria was always there. And that feeling of being wanted, of being needed, became something David found harder to resist. David began to confide in Maria about things he hadn't shared with Sophie. His doubts about their future, his growing fears about the marriage, and as the wedding day drew nearer, David's emotions were tangled. He wanted Sophie, but the more he shared with Maria, the more he felt like he was losing himself. David's attachment to Maria deepened, and Maria's influence over him grew stronger. She wasn't just a confidant anymore. She was the one who made him feel understood, the one who didn't ask for perfection. She was becoming a dangerous temptation, one David could never fully resist. It started innocently enough. Just after work drinks, casual chats about the day's cases, the pressure of hospital life. But those drinks soon turned into secret rendezvous. What started as a simple thank you for being there for me became an excuse to spend more time together away from the stress of work and life. Late-night calls became the norm. At first, they were about work, safety tips for tough cases, hospital gossip. But soon, the conversations began to shift. David started talking about his relationship with Sophie, his doubts, his concerns, his growing sense of suffocation. Maria made David feel seen. She listened to him in a way Sophie couldn't. Sophie had her own expectations, her dreams, her plans for their future. But Maria never asked anything of him except for his time and his trust. And in a world that constantly demanded more of him, Maria gave him comfort. David had always prided himself on being a good man. He loved Sophie. He had proposed to her, had promised her forever. But Maria made him feel alive in ways Sophie couldn't. David was a man torn between two women. One, his fiancée, the woman was supposed to love, the woman with whom he had a future. The other, Maria, the woman who offered him solace, understanding, and a quiet sense of peace. With Sophie, it was all about the future, the wedding plans, the house they'd buy, the children they'd have. But with Maria, it was about the present. It was about being understood, being heard, being someone other than the perfect man he was expected to be. David's guilt began to weigh heavily on him. Every time he was with Sophie, he thought of Maria. And every time he was with Maria, he thought of Sophie. He felt like he was playing a dangerous game, a game where no one could win. As the affair continued, Maria's patience started to wear thin. She no longer wanted to be just the woman on the side. She wanted more. She wanted David to choose her, to make her the center of his life. And she wasn't going to wait forever. "You're so close, David," she says, her voice soft but firm. "You deserve to be happy. You deserve to feel wanted, loved. I can give that to you, but you need to choose. Either you stay in that relationship with Sophie or you let yourself be with me." Maria began to make subtle threats, promises that if David didn't choose her, she'd walk away. But David couldn't bring himself to let her go. The longer the affair went on, the more David found himself pulled deeper into the emotional vortex Maria created. She understood him in ways Sophie couldn't, and every time he tried to end it, Maria would remind him of all the reasons he had to stay. David promised Maria over and over again that he'd end things with Sophie soon. It was always a promise for the future, one that David thought he could keep. He'd reassure Maria that once the wedding was over, once he'd gotten everything sorted with Sophie, he'd choose her. But every day that promise became harder to keep. The problem wasn't just that David was lying to Sophie. It was that every time promised Maria soon. The weight of that promise pushed him further into Maria's grip. He couldn't keep lying to both of them, but he also couldn't seem to let go of either. Months went by, and the affair persisted. David lived two lives, the devoted fiancé during the day and the secret lover at night. Each side of his life was in constant conflict with the other, and the tension began to mount. And Maria, she was only getting bolder. She knew David's indecision was a sign of weakness, but she wasn't going to back down. She had him, and she wasn't going to let him go. It wasn't until the week before David and Sophie's wedding that Maria dropped the bombshell. She was pregnant, 8 weeks pregnant to be exact, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Maria had been holding on to the secret for months, watching the relationship between David and Sophie grow stronger, while her own world quietly crumbled. But now Maria couldn't hide it any longer. She wasn't just a mistress anymore. She was a woman with a child David was responsible for. And in her eyes, that made everything different. David's world, which had seemed so perfectly controlled, was now teetering on the edge. One simple message from Maria, one truth, had the power to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Maria's isolation was growing. Alone in her small apartment, she could no longer ignore the reality of her situation. She had been waiting for David to step up, to take responsibility. But now she knew there was no turning back. The stakes were higher than ever. Maria knew the clock was ticking, and with every day that passed, her anxiety grew. She wasn't just carrying David's child. She was carrying the power to destroy everything he held dear. And she wasn't going to let him walk away so easily. David thought his life was perfect. He was about to marry the woman he loved, the woman he had promised to spend forever with. But now everything had changed. Maria wasn't just a woman he had an affair with. She was the mother of his child, and that was a reality he could no longer ignore. The weight of his lies was finally too much to carry. The man who had carefully planned every detail of his life now realized he was about to lose it all. Maria's ultimatum had forced him to face the truth. He couldn't keep both worlds intact. Someone was going to get hurt. Desperately, David tried to break it off with Maria. He knew that if he didn't, his perfect future with Sophie would crumble. But breaking up with Maria wasn't enough. Maria didn't just want Ackley break. She wanted his life, and she was willing to make sure Sophie knew the truth, no matter the cost. But Maria wasn't letting go that easily. "You think it's that simple?" she demanded. "You think you can walk away from me and this baby?" "No, David, you're not getting off that easy. If you leave me now, I'll make sure Sophie knows exactly what's been going on." As Sophie poured herself into the final details of their wedding, David's mind was elsewhere. She was blissfully unaware, consumed with excitement about their future, picking out flowers, planning their honeymoon, talking about the house they'd buy. She didn't know that in the shadows, David's life was unraveling. Sophie couldn't have known that every moment leading up to their wedding was a constant reminder for David of the lie he was living. Every time she smiled at him, every time she talked about their life together, he felt the weight of his secret pressing harder on him. The wedding was drawing near. Sophie was still lost in the dream of their perfect future. But David could barely breathe. Maria's ultimatum had him on edge, constantly checking his phone, his mind racing. He knew Heck couldn't keep up this charade for much longer. He had promised Sophie forever, but his actions told a different story. 1 week before the wedding, Sophie was counting down the days, eagerly planning her dream wedding, imagining the perfect future she would have with David. But David was counting down seconds, knowing that his perfect life was about to come crashing down. Sophie kept telling him how perfect everything was, how it felt like the beginning of forever. But for David, forever had become a lie. He couldn't stop thinking about the storm brewing on the other side of his perfect wedding day. The woman who was threatening to destroy it all, every smile Sophie gave him, every dream she shared about their future, every wedding detail she excitedly discussed. David felt the pressure building. He couldn't focus on anything other than Maria's looming threat. The closer they got to the wedding, the more desperate Maria became. David tried to keep up appearances. He tried to be the loving fiancé Sophie expected him to be. But inside, he was unraveling, and Maria's constant demands only made it worse. Maria had waited long enough. As David's wedding day drew closer, she could feel the power slipping from her grasp. She had given him every opportunity to make a choice, but he was still trying to have it both ways. And Maria, she wasn't having it anymore. David had been ignoring her texts, blocking her calls, but Maria knew that would only make things worse. She wasn't going to be ignored. Not anymore. In that moment, Maria went from being the understanding confidant to something more dangerous. A woman who would stoop at nothing to make David face the reality of his choices. But Maria wasn't interested in David's promises anymore. She had made her decision, and now she was going to make him choose. "You're weak, David." Maria texted him, her words dripping with contempt. "You can't even handle this situation. You can't even stand up for what you want. You're pathetic. And you want me to believe you're going to choose Sophie? You're still too scared to face the truth. Beauty won't let you hide anymore." Maria wasn't just threatening him with exposure. She was calling him out. She was stripping him of his dignity and forcing him to confront the man he had become. A man who couldn't even keep his word to the woman he was supposed to love. David knew the walls were closing in. He couldn't keep both lives going forever. He tried to reach out to Maria one last time, trying to calm the storm she had created. But Maria was done with his empty promises. She wanted something more from him, something Sophie would never understand. She wanted David's life, and she was going to make sure he gave it to her. Maria didn't back down. She didn't let him off the hook. She wanted her moment, and she would have it no matter who she had to hurt along the way. The night had arrived, the night David had been dreading. The night he promised himself he would end everything with Maria once and for all. He had no choice. In his mind, there was no other option. He couldn't lose Sophie. He couldn't lose the life he had built. He couldn't let Maria destroy everything he had worked so hard for. David had tried to control the situation for months, tried to balance his lies. But now, with Sophie's wedding dress hanging in the next room, everything felt too fragile. He couldn't risk Maria going to Sophie. He couldn't let his perfect world crumble before the wedding he had promised to Sophie. He had to make her go away. Permanently, David arrived at Maria's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had told himself this was the last time he would ever see her. He had to end it. He had to make her understand. But deep down, David knew this was not just a conversation. It was a final reckoning. Maria welcomed him in with her usual calm, almost seductive demeanor, her voice soft but insistent. "David, we need to talk. We need to figure this out. You can't just walk away from me now." David tried to talk her down. He tried to convince her that he was committed to Sophie, that there was no future for them, that it was of her. But every word felt weaker than the last. Maria wasn't listening. She wasn't going to let him go that easily. She had a plan of her own. The conversation, the pleading, the emotional pull, none of it worked. Maria was relentless, accusing him of betrayal, manipulating him with promises and threats. And in that moment, David's mind snapped. His panic overtook him. He couldn't let her destroy everything. He couldn't let his life be torn apart. David thought he could talk her down, but in the end, he chose the only option he thought would work. He couldn't think clearly. He couldn't let Maria ruin everything. and in his mind, poisoning her was the only way to keep her silent, keep her from going to Sophie. Maria took a sip, and that was all it took. As the life drained from Maria's body, David stood still, paralyzed by what he had just done. The woman who had threatened his perfect life was gone, but the cost, the guilt, the weight of his actions was now his to carry. He had ended it, but at what price? David arrived at the wedding like nothing had changed. Sophie was glowing, busy with last-minute details, completely unaware of the dark secret that had just been sealed. David walked into the venue, putting on his mask of calm, his facade of normality. The wedding. His wedding was still on. David tried to act normal. He tried to play the part of the happy groom. But every moment, every laugh, every word Sophie spoke was tainted by the truth of what he had done. The reality of his life, the lies, the murder hung over him like a shadow. But Sophie remained blissfully unaware. After the ceremony, David and Sophie spent their wedding night in the luxury of a Manhattan hotel. Sophie was radiant, excited for their new life together. But David was trapped. He couldn't escape the weight of what he had done. He couldn't escape the knowledge that he had taken a life to protect his own. The honeymoon was supposed to be the beginning of forever. But for David, it was a prison. Every moment he spent with Sophie felt like a lie. The guilt gnawed at him constantly, a reminder of the life he had destroyed. Maria had disappeared the night of the wedding. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. At first, it seemed like just another case of a troubled woman retreating into isolation. But as the days passed with no sign of her, concern started to grow. Friends and family couldn't get in touch with her, and soon her absence was marked by something far darker. Her apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. The lights were off, and nothing seemed out of place. But when Maria's best friend called the police, it marked the beginning of something much more sinister. At 4:15 p.m., 2 days after her disappearance, the police found her. Maria was dead, and what appeared to be a tragic case of abandonment would soon unravel as a case of murder. The scene was disturbing. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a body, lifeless and cold, abandoned in her own home. But the police knew something didn't add up. The answer would be found in the details. As the investigation progressed, the toxicology report came back. It revealed something chilling. Maria had been poisoned. The levels of potassium chloride in her system were high, too high to be accidental. The death wasn't just tragic, it was calculated, premeditated. The poisoning was deliberate. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and one thing became clear. Someone close to Maria had ended her life. Someone who knew how to hide their tracks. The breakthrough came when security cameras from the apartment complex were reviewed. The footage showed David entering and leaving Maria's apartment the night she died. The timestamp matched perfectly with the time Maria had been poisoned. David's movements were captured, his nervousness and mistal. He had gone into the building that night, and he had left shortly after Maria was poisoned. It was damning evidence. The police were no longer just investigating a missing person. They were investigating a murder. The investigation was closing in on him. But David was still trying to live his life as if nothing had changed. He showed up for his shifts at the hospital, going through the motions. But every day felt like a lie. He couldn't escape the crushing guilt, the paranoia. Every text, every phone call made him jump in fear. He acted devastated over Maria's death. He kept telling his colleague how heartbroken he was that someone he'd known for so long was gone. He showed up at the hospital with an expression of shock, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. But inside, he was terrified. He knew the police were getting closer, and he knew they were watching him. But behind the facade, David was starting to crack. The lies were piling up, and he couldn't keep track of them anymore. Every time someone mentioned Maria, every time someone asked him about her, he felt his heart race, knowing his secrets were inching closer to being exposed. The walls were closing in. David tried to keep his composure at work, to act like the perfect fiancé, the grieving man who had lost a friend. But deep down he knew that everything he had built was about to come crashing down. He couldn't escape his lie. It was about to catch up with him. As the investigation grew more intense, David realized that he couldn't keep running. The truth was coming for him and he couldn't outrun it. He had destroyed Maria's life and in the process he had shattered his own. It happened fast. One moment, David was living his life, going to work, preparing for his future with Sophie. The next, he was being handcuffed and led away in front of everyone. David's heart raced as the detectives read him his rights. His mind was spinning. How had it come to this? His hands shook as they cuffed him, but inside he knew it was over. The police had enough evidence. They were arresting him for the murder of Maria Sanchez, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sophie was at home, blissful unaware of the storm about to hit. She was smiling as she picked out furniture for their new home, sending final wedding photos to family members. She thought she had married the man of her dreams, the man who had promised to love her forever. When Sophie was told that her new husband was being arrested for murder, her world shattered in an instant. The life she thought they were building together crumbled to dust, and Sophie's reality became a nightmare. Sophie had trusted him. She had believed every word, every promise he made. She had married him just days ago, convinced he was the perfect man, the one who had given her the future she had always dreamed of. But now everything she knew to be true was shattered. How had she missed the signs? How had she not seen it? How could the man she trusted with her heart, the man she had built a future with, be capable of something so horrific? Sophie's breakdown was not just one of grief, it was one of betrayal. The man she thought she knew, the man she thought she was marrying had been living a double life. A man who had lied to her, manipulated her, and ultimately taken someone else's life to protect his own. The truth is, we can never fully know someone. We think we can, but can we? We trust the people we love, the ones we share our lives with. But how often do we truly know what lies beneath the surface, the truth, as Sophie learned too late? Is that sometimes the person we trust most is the one capable of betraying us the deepest? 1 week, that's all it took for David to go from the man Sophie thought she married to a murderer. 7 days from the moment they pledged forever to the moment her entire life came crashing down around her. And in that short time, David managed to destroy everything he had built, taking a life in the process. How well do you really know the people in your life? Could you see the signs if something was wrong? Could you spot the lies before they destroy everything? So, how well do you know the person sitting next to you right now? Think about it. This story is a chilling reminder of just how deep deception can run. David was able to hide his dark side behind a facade of charm and love, only to destroy the very person he swore to protect. It's a stark truth that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of causing the most harm. But what's worse is that we often don't see it until it's too late. Never ignore the signs of manipulation, lies, or control in your relationships. If you see red flags, things that don't feel right, things that make you question what's real, speak up. Trust your instincts. Don't let it get this far. Because the truth is, it only takes one small lie to unravel a life. If this story shocked you, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with someone who might be in a relationship that seems too good to be true. Your share could save a life. Don't let someone fall into the same trap Sophie did. What about you? Have you ever noticed red flags in a relationship? Or maybe you've been in a situation where you realized something wasn't right. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you found out the person you trusted most was hiding something dangerous? We want to hear from you. If you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear what we have next. We'll be diving into more dark secrets and betrayal that will make you question everything you know about trust. Stay tuned for our next video where we uncover even more twisted true crime stories. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming stories. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for more unsettling true crime stories that will leave you speechless.